Hello everyone, welcome to Straight Talks F1. I've been away for a while. I haven't recorded any episode since the Monaco Grand Prix, and there's a reason for it. The T20 World Cup was going on, so my schedule was completely all over the place, trying to watch and follow the World Cup. And that's the reason I could not take out time to drop individual episodes on the races. And it's quite ironic that F1 has turned out to peak at the same time. The last four races have been epic, particularly Canada and Austria, which seemed to be going on the boring side of it, but then they suddenly lit up. So it's quite unfortunate, I would say, I could not record episodes, but that's what I'm going to do in this episode. I'm going to do a roundup of all those races and give my perspective on what's happened between Verstappen and Norris in Austria, chaos of Canada. It was so cool to watch. It reminded me of the 2011 race. We had a battle of attrition in Spain, almost pure on strategy. That's what you expect in Spain. Barcelona track, not the most exciting one, but we have had some decent races in the past 2 years over there. On the other hand, Silverstone, I almost thought Verstappen could just clinch it off, but Mercedes was superb. Their pace, the sudden rise that Mercedes have got in this season. I'll talk about that in a later episode I'm going to do this week. I'm not going to talk about all the teams in this episode because there was so much to talk about in the races itself. And then the development war that's going on between teams, the kind of step ups McLaren and Mercedes have made, the downfall of Ferrari, as much as it hurts for me to say, and the uncertainty that Red Bull is facing with the RB20. That deserves an entire different episode. And this episode is just a roundup of the races and the races particularly that I missed to record an episode upon. So let's start with Canada first. Now the Canadian GP was an absolute chaos. I would say the best race of the season. Yeah, many would say Silverstone, the British GP, much better. The kind of overtaking, the strategy they saw in Silverstone, I would say quite at par with Montreal. But Montreal, Canada, it was the best race of the season for me because it reminded me so much of the 2011 race where we saw multiple pit stops, multiple race leaders. It was pure chaos. It was so chaotic. It was so close. Qualifying was so close. Dead heat times. George Russell and Max Verstappen setting the exact same time in qualifying for pole. Only once has that happened in F1 history. Only once that has happened in F1 history. 1997, Jerez, Spain. Schumacher, Jacques Villeneuve, Heinz Harald Frentzen. Setting the exact same time. And that just stops this one because it had three drivers. Or else this dead heat time by Verstappen and Russell, definitely not behind that instance. It has only happened twice in F1 history. And I would say we are lucky, we are fortunate enough to witness it one of those times live. But yeah, that's Canada. The Montreal track is so good. It is one of the best on the calendar, and with rain forecast throughout the weekend, it was always going to be chaotic. It was always going to be quite exciting. And we got an exciting race. What was unexpected though was Mercedes being so quick. Russell pulling off that pole position and the Mercedes W15 suddenly coming alive in the race as well. Now race pace has been their strength, but the car has been so edgy, it has been so undrivable. Hamilton and Russell themselves have admitted. So to see that car so competitive and quick, it almost felt like it was track specific. Montreal is a track very particular. Not a lot of different variety of corners. Short chicanes, long straights. Not the kind of track you would want to benchmark your performance upon. But Mercedes turned up. At least for that weekend they felt, alright, we are back in the fight. Let's try to build upon this. And they did well. Even if it was a 3-4, it could have been a double podium, maybe a win. But they did extremely well. Still McLaren had the fastest car. And I don't understand how they managed to lose that race. You had Verstappen showing his class, all his experience, taking his 60th race win. So that's understandable. But McLaren had a chance to win this race on strategy. I felt they missed out over there. Honestly, they could have easily pit at the right time where the sun was beating down. You had people pitting for slick tires, and they choose to keep Norris out on intermediate tires on a drying track. It does not make sense. So I would say McLaren squandered that opportunity to pit Norris at the right time, because by then Verstappen had pitted and he had got his tires up to temperature, and of course he got the lead as well after Norris pitted. So I think McLaren lost a big opportunity there to win the Canadian GP. That's a race they hadn't been in the points even for a long time. So of course getting that podium was a big redemption, but they could have won it. They could have won it because they had the strongest car. Red Bull was so vulnerable throughout the Canadian GP weekend. The car was all over the place. They knew Canada was going to be tough. The bumpy and curvy nature of Canada, it's not something Red Bull is able to solve right now. They told it's a fundamental issue, and that's something that will only get resolved in next year's car. I feel McLaren lost that opportunity to take this win, and they have done that again and again in the last 6 races, including this one. But overall, as a race, Canada was so good. Multiple race leaders. There was rain, so there was going to be strategy involved. Even the overtaking was so good. It's a track where overtaking is quite possible, so that's expected. But in the wet conditions, and big shout out to Kevin Magnussen, because the kind of criticism he's faced on his driving standards, him not following the rules in terms of defending and attacking everything. So this was a big redemption for him. On the wet tires, Haas were the only ones using wet tires at the start of that race, and he went on the prowl, he went on the attack, car after car, lap after lap. Hats off Kevin Magnussen. That was pure K-Mag redemption. His racecraft is damn good. He doesn't get enough credit for his racecraft, courtesy of all his shenanigans that he does, and that's quite fair. But that's how Kevin Magnussen can race. That's how well Kevin Magnussen can race. On wet tires, car after car, he almost was in the podium places. And had Haas timed their strategy well, that could have been a really big result. They've had a P4 last year with Hülkenberg. This year Hülkenberg's got a couple of P6 finishes. But Kevin Magnussen getting that big haul of points could have been so good. But yeah, that's how it is, and hopefully Haas do well. Hopefully Magnussen gets a big result this year. And meanwhile, there was Ferrari, who came into Canada thinking that they are back in the championship fight, 24 points within Red Bull's reach, and suddenly they have a double DNF. I thought it was going to be a race to forget, just a one-off race to forget. The double DNF of Canada is something that Ferrari fans are going to think about for a long time, because the trend it has started, it's quite horrific, and I'll talk about it later in the later episode as well. But let's move on to the next race in Spain for now. Now, honestly, not much to talk about the Spanish GP. It was a classic strategy race. I enjoyed it overall. The qualifying was damn good. Norris taking pole by 0.02 seconds. Kudos to Norris for that. Edge out Max Verstappen, and Verstappen has been damn good in qualifying this year. Not something we say every year. Last year he did not take as many poles as his race wins. So for Norris to take that pole in Spain, it was quite meaningful. It also cemented McLaren's status that they have got a car at par with Red Bull, which is a big thing to say in this ground effect era. It hasn't been the case for a while. So McLaren sort of became a front runner in Barcelona, and they tried their best. They tried something different with the strategy in the race. Tried an overcut, kept Norris out for long, and tried to make up the time in the final stint on fresher tires. It did not work out because the undercut is so powerful around Barcelona. Unless you got a lot of pace advantage in your car, an overcut strategy doesn't work in Spain. So kudos to McLaren for trying something different rather than just sticking to it and following Verstappen home. They went for the win, but it could not happen. That was good mentality from Norris to try and go for the win rather than settling for second. He wanted to attack, he wanted to take the win, and maybe couple more laps he could have, but that's not how it works. You have the stipulated amount of laps, you can't argue with that. So it was a regulation race. What was again unexpected was Mercedes being surprisingly strong. So their Canada performance was not track specific, and they also felt relieved. Fair enough, we are coming back to the front, our issues are getting resolved, and the result of that came in the next two races, obviously. But this was a good race for them, getting a podium. Hamilton's first podium of the season, so big deal for him. But overall, it was Verstappen managing it well. Red Bull doing their best to do well on strategy, time management, everything. So this wasn't a race I would say McLaren should have won. Like, they tried their best, but it's understandable that Verstappen won ahead of Norris, just like Imola, because they just managed it that much better. Their strategy was that much better, just like Imola. But it all unfolded, it all unraveled between those two in Austria. And we're gonna get into that because that's the spicy bit of this episode. Now, the Austrian GP always provides good races, and we had some great racing action. Some of the best overtaking and racing action we have had for the past 2-3 years. Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, a three-way fight for the sprint race win. And there's one overhead footage of those three going from turn 2 to turn 6, battling each other, the two McLarens side by side, and Verstappen holding both of them off. Like, they're hanging on for dear life at the edge of that track. It was the best racing action I've seen for a while. People hype off the Leclerc, Perez, and Hamilton moment in 2022 in Silverstone, and that is damn good, through goes Hamilton. But this was the case where Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, they were fighting each other. They could have took out each other. They could have took out Verstappen with them, but they kept it clean, and it was damn good to watch. And then the Grand Prix, it was quite boring for most of it. It was a regulation strategy race, people not much overtaking, DRS trains, so that's quite expected in Spielberg in Austria. But then it all unraveled. Finally, just like the sprint race, we had an intense battle for the win. Verstappen and Norris, two best friends, and they were going at it. It all began with the slow stop for Verstappen, so it is Red Bull's fault to let Verstappen fall into Norris's clutches. And Norris was damn good to go on the prowl, to go on the attack. As I said earlier, this sort of cemented that McLaren had the fastest car, or had the faster car, beat by a bit, but they had arguably the faster car ahead of Red Bull. And he was attacking him lap after lap after lap. So it was a rare case. Verstappen hasn't faced this sort of intense battle in the past 2 years. Multiple tries at turn 3, Norris wanting to overtake, take the lead. He had fresher tires, and he could have pulled off a good move at turn 3. Norris could have pulled off a good move at turn 3 down the inside, but then obviously Verstappen went off track, there was all that chaos. And on the next lap, lap 64, Norris tried going around the outside of Max, breaking Verstappen at that corner. Firstly, going down the outside at turn 3 in Austria is quite difficult. Usually, the standard overtaking maneuver there is down the inside. So, unless you got massive pace advantage on your car, pulling off an overtake around the outside of turn 3 is rather very difficult. It's not going to be easy ever, because the corner is almost a narrow hairpin. It's a 90-degree corner and it's quite tight, so going down the outside without any pace advantage won't yield as much success. But still, Norris tried it because he was fed up perhaps to try down the inside, and Verstappen just wasn't giving him any space, and they had to collide. The way Verstappen squeezed Norris, it was 100% his fault. He was quite aggressive to move under braking, so they had to collide. So I'm not defending Verstappen's mistake over here, but at the same time, Norris could have been smart about it. He did not yield, he did not attempt a switchover maneuver. Charles Leclerc did that in 2022 at the same corner. He attempted an overtake around the outside, and Verstappen's exit was compromised out of turn 3, and Leclerc cut back down the inside to the exit of turn 3 to take the lead. So a switcheroo overtake was definitely possible for Norris, but perhaps in the heat of the battle, it was so intense. He was trying to overtake lap after lap. He may have sort of forgotten to think about that possibility because Norris could have got the lead, and of course, Verstappen would have been aggressive to take the lead again. But Norris could have been smarter about it. Take that lead because the bigger picture was winning the race. It wasn't about being stubborn in that battle, taking it around the outside, knowing that it isn't possible to overtake around the outside, or it is rather difficult to overtake around the outside at turn 3, and you are racing against Max Verstappen. While Norris has not had the taste of going wheel to wheel with Verstappen, he does not have as much experience of the kind of aggressive maneuvers Verstappen can pull to maintain his lead. You can ask Lewis Hamilton, but his lack of experience fighting against Verstappen and especially fighting for wins, I think that is showing up over here. He may have cracked under pressure, he may have cracked under the intensity of that battle. Still, it was Verstappen's mistake. I am just talking about how Norris could have won that race. By being smart, you don't beat Max Verstappen by brute force, by being stubborn, by matching his stubbornness, his aggressiveness. You beat Verstappen by being smart. You have to outsmart him, and that's what Verstappen himself did in 21. He was also being stubborn and aggressive, but had he not being smart enough at particular points of the championship, he would not have won that championship. So that's the thing. If you want to be a world champion, you got to be aggressive and stubborn. Don't yield. But at the same time, you got to take a step back, achieve the bigger picture. That's something Norris needs to learn, and he will learn. This may not be as realistic of a championship battle this year, but going into 25, 26, this is crucial for Norris if he wants to win world championships, especially against Verstappen. But yeah, amid all this, George Russell and Mercedes taking the win. Of all people, it's crazy to think that it's Russell and Mercedes who were there to pick up the pieces where Verstappen and Norris, leading the race, collide. I mean, Piastri could have been in the perfect position if he did not have that grid penalty. But I'm glad that it was Russell, not Piastri, because this was a very odd race to take a win at. Even Russell acknowledged that. He did not expect that win. He was settling for P3, and suddenly the top two collide and he's the winner. So I'm happy Piastri's first win hasn't come in such circumstances. A first Grand Prix win should always be like a weekend where the driver stamps his authority. And I hope Piastri's first Grand Prix win comes in those sort of circumstances, rather than the top two colliding and him picking up the pieces. But yeah, Mercedes won a race for the first time since Brazil in 22, which was quite crazy to think. They had made a step up in performance, but I did not expect them to win a race, and it did not stop there. They have won a race on pure merit, on pure pace in Silverstone. Meanwhile, McLaren have once again fumbled another race win. I would definitely say Silverstone, Austria, and Canada. These are three wins McLaren could have easily got. Instead, Mercedes have got two of those and Verstappen one. So that's what I'm going to discuss in the next segment about the British GP. Now, the British GP was always going to be one of the best races of the season. Not the best. I would still say Canada was the best. But Silverstone delivered again. And with rainy conditions, it always makes it exciting on a track like Silverstone where overtaking is in abundance. And rainy conditions just spice it up even more in terms of strategy, especially. The unexpected thing again was Mercedes turning up to take pole. McLaren had the strongest car, they had the fastest car overall. Red Bull was struggling, Red Bull were further handicapped when Perez beached his car in the gravel in qualifying. So once again, they had just one car with Verstappen at the front. McLaren had the pace to lock out the front though, but somehow Mercedes just edged them out. A Mercedes front row at Silverstone, it sort of gave me flashbacks of the dominant days. It's like the regime was back. The Fourth Reich under Toto Wolff, the regime was back. But yeah, jokes apart, like Mercedes turning up race after race, what was a surprise win in Austria? They should not have really been on the front row, but the upgrades have been so consistent. They have worked well. And from where they were at the start of the season from Bahrain and Australia, this is some progress. This is stupendous progress. Russell DNF'd. It's a sad thing at his home race he DNF'd, but of course Lewis Hamilton breaking his hiatus, a huge moment, a huge relief for him, a huge relief for Mercedes that finally, after the scars of Abu Dhabi 2021, after taking his last win in Jeddah in 21, he finally won a race. But I'm not going to harp on about Hamilton's praises because everyone else has. I'm going to talk about the other side of it, how McLaren fumbled this because, or I don't even know if calling it a fumble makes sense because they did not know what hit them. Either they gave it away or Mercedes took it, but somehow this race did not feel right from McLaren's perspective. Like it was a tragedy, I would say, that they repeated the same mistake in terms of tire strategy, changeable race conditions, drying track, and all that chaos just had to make them fumble perhaps. They were super quick on inters, and Mercedes had just one car after Russell retired. They were in the hunt with Hamilton. McLaren had both cars. Yes, Piastri lost some ground at the first pit stop with the intermediates, but they had Norris in a commanding position. They had the pace in the car, and when the conditions changed, they could have executed the strategy well. They should have learned from Canada. They kept Norris out again, and Mercedes undercut them. Hamilton and Verstappen even undercut him. Verstappen definitely on the hard tires, so he had obviously lost time in the first part of the race. So to gain that time back, but eventually even Verstappen overtook Norris for P2. So it's an unreal fumble that McLaren and Norris have the fastest car at their home race, and they don't win, and they don't even finish second. It's Hamilton and Verstappen. Credit to Mercedes, their performance has stepped up. It's leveled up massively. So big hats off to them. But talking about McLaren's strategy with this strategy, inters to slicks, the track is drying, the sun is beating down. All they had to do is pit for the optimal tire they have been confident with. But they made it confusing for Norris. They asked him which tire set does he want, softs or mediums. Because Hamilton was on softs, Verstappen was on hard tires. They're asking him who does he want to cover, Hamilton or Verstappen. And that's where they lost the race, I would say. Giving Norris a choice rather than guiding him, knowing that he is not the best guy to make strategy calls. He's fumbled in Sochi 3 years ago, so McLaren should have guided him, feeling that they know, according to Friday practice data, Rachel Brooks from Sky Sports highlighted this, that McLaren and Norris were the fastest car on the medium tires. So them taking soft tires with 14-15 laps remaining, that did not make sense. Their choice of tire set just to cover Hamilton being on softs, it does not make sense with 14-15 laps remaining. That's my logic. The soft tire is a set which is quite fragile. If you push it too hard, especially over the span of 10 laps, it will degrade. And there was no chance that Norris was going to keep attacking at Hamilton without those soft tires degrading in the final stint. If he had medium tires, he could have had the luxury to push more without the mediums degrading. Without worrying about tire deg, he could have attacked Hamilton more and possibly could have won the race. Even Hamilton said that mediums were the fastest tire to to be on. That's what Hamilton said. And Verstappen's recovery to P2 on hard tires just proves that sometimes you got to take an optimal tire that would last long as per the stint length rather than going for the fastest tire just because the final 10-12 laps are remaining. And of course, the late pit stop further allowed Hamilton to overtake him. And from there, he did not look back. Hamilton is definitely not looking back. He's won a race on 3 tires at Silverstone in 2020. So he can definitely manage a degrading set of soft tires from a charging McLaren. That's something McLaren needs to work upon because Piastri was on medium tires and he was one of the fastest car in the final stint. It's just because he lost ground in the initial part of the race, so he could not be on the podium. But if Norris was on mediums, I would say Norris could have easily won that race. But yeah, we have the benefit of hindsight, obviously. In the heat of the moment, it's difficult to take those calls. So we can give the benefit of doubt to McLaren. At the same time, they need to have this learning. They need to go through this learning curve as quickly as possible if they want to consistently fight for wins and turn these results into their favor. Canada, Austria, Silverstone. These are the 3 races I feel McLaren should have won. As I mentioned earlier, their strategy could have won them these races. And in Austria's case, obviously, Norris being a bit smart with the overtaking, their strategy was rather good in Austria. But in Canada and Silverstone, from a strategy perspective, they fumbled those wins and Verstappen and Mercedes capitalizing on it. So it shows maybe the gulf in experience in recent years to fight for wins and championships. Mercedes and Red Bull, they've won everything for a reason for the past decade. So I think it's that experience that's coming in handy for Mercedes and of course Red Bull, the reigning champions. But yeah, that's how the British GP unfolded for McLaren and Mercedes. And Verstappen, he's not really in the limelight at the moment, but he's quietly extending his championship lead at the front. In Austria also, he had the collision and the puncture. He took his car back to the pits, ensured that his car did not suffer a lot of damage, and ensured he consolidated some points. P5 finish in Austria. And again, in Silverstone, could not win the race, but a P2 finish. That is definitely going to go a long way when it comes to winning a sport championship. Like at this stage, I don't think anybody can challenge Verstappen. Be it Norris or Leclerc, who's not even in the position to challenge with Ferrari's downfall. But yeah, even Norris, I don't think he can challenge Verstappen for the championship this year. Verstappen will keep maximizing his races. He'll play the percentage game. Yes, Austria can be an example that shows Verstappen under pressure, making mistakes, going to his aggressive old self. But I feel the run of races he's managed to win 3 races in the past 6. And on the other tracks, he's consolidated the best possible result. I would say hats off Max Verstappen. Even with so much competition, to maintain his championship lead, that's quite spectacular, that's quite commendable. And McLaren need to learn a lot. 5 out of the last 6 race wins would have been theirs, at least 3. They have the fastest car, Norris has the speed. So it's not like there's a performance problem. They need to execute their races better in terms of tire strategy, in terms of pit stops, because they are just dropping race wins now. Just because of the execution, their strategy, they cannot afford to drop wins, or else they are not going to be able to fight Red Bull and Verstappen. Meanwhile, Mercedes suddenly have a car that can fight for wins, 2 wins on the trot. They would be mighty confident to replace McLaren. The only thing Mercedes don't have in terms of getting into championship battle is the start of the season was quite abysmal, so they do not have a points foundation to build upon and take the charge to Red Bull. They have got 2 good drivers, quick enough car now, but let's see how much Red Bull fumbles or if they can recover. And this is what I'm going to talk about next in the next episode, how the development war has went on and how things have changed a lot for McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari. Aston Martin are nowhere, and of course Red Bull's troubles. So it will be sort of a mid-season review because this is the midpoint of the season. 12 races done after Silverstone, 12 to go. The team's preview I did before the start of the season, before pre-season testing. Things have changed a lot since then, so it would be fun to see where do teams stack up and what is the realistic chance of a championship battle in the constructors, not the drivers. As I said earlier, Verstappen's got it in the bag. I don't think anybody can challenge him or beat him. So yeah, felt good to record a podcast episode after a long time, and I'm going to do one more for this week, the mid-season review, as I said, and that's going to be fun to get my podcast back on track finally. But yeah, until then, arigato and stay tuned.